The Trump administration has laid off 1,300 workers at the Department of Education, more than a third of the workforce there. And the GOP wants to deliver the final blow. Republican senators have introduced a bill to officially close the department. The Department of Education is like a federal backstop to make sure all states are educating all children equally. It also manages the financial aid students need to have a college opportunity, at least somewhat equally. It does a lot of other things. So how would its disappearance trickle down to North Country school districts? We tally up the ways on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Claxton-Hepburn Medical Center, dedicated to providing patient care and regional services to the people of St. Lawrence County. claxtonhepburn.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Thursday, April 10th. First up, 4 current students and 9 recent graduates of the University of Buffalo have had their visas revoked by the federal government. According to the Department of Homeland Security, none of the 13 had criminal records beyond some traffic violations. In an email to faculty and staff obtained by the New York Public News Network, Provost Scott Weber said the university is reaching out to those affected to provide advice and support. The University of Buffalo has an international population of more than 8,000 students, putting it in the top 25 of American schools with the most foreign students. Similar visa revocations have occurred at Harvard, Stanford, Michigan, UCLA, and Ohio State University in recent days. In a campus letter today, St. Lawrence University President Kate Morris said the university is, quote, steadfast in its support for international students and is proactively confirming students' visas. She said so far, no St. Lawrence students have had their visas revoked. State education officials are pushing back on the Trump administration's demand for an end to DEI programming in public schools. That's drawing praise from the statewide teachers union. Noelle Evans reports for the New York Public News Network.
The U.S. Department of Education sent a memo to states last week requesting certification of their legal obligation under Title VI in return for federal funding. Title VI is a law that prohibits discrimination based on race, color, and national origin. The memo states that certain DEI practices can violate federal law and that continued use of illegal DEI practices in schools could lead to funding cuts and legal action. The New York State Education Department shot back, writing in a letter that there are no laws prohibiting the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that it has already certified Title VI compliance multiple times, and that the federal agency can make, in their words, whatever policy pronouncements it likes, but it cannot conflate policy with law. New York State United Teachers President Melinda Person said in a statement that New York will not be bullied into abandoning its core values. It remains to be seen what capacity the federal department has to enforce its policy. The agency cut roughly 50% of staff last month. In Rochester, I'm Noelle Evans for the New York Public News Network.
President Donald Trump has said in no uncertain terms that he wants to eliminate the federal Department of Education. So what would that mean for North Country school districts? Amy Feiereisel reports.
All North Country districts receive some amount of federal funding each year, and it usually represents between 2 and 8% of school budgets. The largest amounts they receive are to support children with disabilities and for schools that are rural and or low income, which the North Country has a lot of.
Schools that are identified as high poverty receive title money.
Lee Kyler is the elementary school principal for Elizabethtown's Boquete Valley Central School District.
That is how we fund reading intervention, math intervention, behavior intervention programs and services for our most needy students.
So it's those students and their aides and reading teachers that Kyler worries about when he hears calls for the federal education department to be shuttered. And that's become a lot more real in recent weeks. On March 20th, President Donald Trump signed an executive order telling his Secretary of Education to dismantle the department to the best of her abilities. His administration has fired half the department's staff. It's made deep cuts to programs and research. And it's gutted the department's Office for Civil Rights. Kyler says that office protects the rights of students with physical or educational disabilities. disabilities. It essentially allows parents to file federal complaints if they have concerns about their child's education or if they think their child has been discriminated against.
As a parent of a child with disabilities and as an administrator, I know that's an important right that we often highlight to families of you have this right if you disagree.
The federal department's Office for Civil Rights handled almost 23,000 claims in 2024.
There's a big question of if that office ceases to exist, who's going to be responsible for looking at those claims.
Bianca Fortis is a reporter for New York Focus, a statewide nonprofit newsroom. She's reported on the potential impacts of shuttering the federal education department.
In certainly states that are more progressive, like New York, they might be willing to take that on. But other states that are a little bit more conservative, where civil rights is less of a priority, we don't know what's going to happen.
This is part of what Trump says he wants, to return all power over education to the states. That's not a new desire. Other Republican presidents have also pushed the idea. The reason no one has succeeded is simple. The U.S. Department of Education was created by Congress in 1979, so only Congress can close it. Fortis says that stymied Trump in his first term when Betsy DeVos, his education secretary, submitted budget after budget that slashed funding for the department.
Since she had to defend this in front of Congress, and those proposals were repeatedly rejected by Congress.
In his second term, Trump is trying to effect the change he wants through executive orders and by closing programs and firing people. Those actions are being challenged as unconstitutional in the courts. But in the meantime, there are literally fewer people on staff. Educators like Lee Kyler wonder, who will do the work?
That's a worry that I have, is the turnaround for things like applications for title, literally who's opening the mail and answering the emails.
Brandon Pelkey is the superintendent of Malone Central School District. He says dismantling the federal education department isn't something to take lightly or do without an articulated plan because of the stakes, real children.
It's a slippery slope to beyond when you don't know what kind of oversight will be provided.
When asked about who will manage the department's programs, including student loans, the Trump administration has said that those functions will be given to other agencies better suited to manage them. Pelkey has doubts about that. He pointed to the work of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency.
They're dismantling everything.
For example, Trump promised that programs for students with disabilities would be moved to the Department of Health and Human Services. Less than 2 weeks later, his administration announced mass layoffs there, axing roughly a quarter of the department's workforce.
So, if you say you're going to take something out of the federal education department, and you're dismantling another department, you may not have a place to actually put it anymore.
All the people I spoke with for this story say they're worried about trickle-down effects from closing the Department of Education. Another thing they're worried about are free school meals. That's managed by another department facing cuts. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reimburses high-poverty schools for providing free breakfast and lunch for their students. A Republican bill wants to cut that program by $12 billion by making fewer schools eligible for the funding. Dale Brialt is superintendent of the Franklin Essex Hamilton BOCES.
A lot of the universal free meal programs that have been put into place in our school districts, they may change the rules midstream, where a lot of the schools that put that into place will now be forced to either fund them locally or not be able to offer them any longer.
Lee Kyler from Boquete Valley Central School District says his district has provided free breakfast and lunch since 2019, and it makes a big difference for its students. But the district wouldn't qualify under the proposed new rules.
And that is a huge impact that is unknown.
Kyler is optimistic that even if all their federal funding disappeared and free meals were no longer free, that North Country districts would take care of their students. But he says they would have to find places to reduce costs, trimming extracurriculars, cutting teachers. He says he and other administrators are fielding questions from a lot of worried families right now, and it's hard to have to say, we don't know.
Which doesn't feel good because we're supposed to have the answers. We are supposed to know what's happening.
Kyler says it's certainly making budget season a bit more fraught. Districts will propose budgets to be voted on by their communities in May. They can only hope that funding they rely on still exists in the next school year. Amy Feiereisel, North Country Public Radio.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Our spring fundraiser starts next week, and it's just 1 week, 5 days this time. 5 days to secure public radio's future, to make sure this local North Country journalism can always be there for you, answering questions, challenging officials, highlighting real voices, your neighbors. get in on our early bird drawing for a $1,000 gift card. But the most important thing is to donate right now at ncpr.org/give. Thank you so much. Music today by Michael Farley of Canton, and I am Snow Angel of Lake Placid. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.